I want to welcome you to a night to remember. We have former and current wing members who were here when Miss Mitchell arrived, and I thought it was time to get some of these people together to answer some questions. We all like to show off Miss Mitchell. We give tours, we take it to shows, we give tours here in the building, and I want to make sure that we're using factual information. So I got these folks together. My name tags didn't arrive in time. You were all supposed to have name tags in front of you.
We know who we are.
You know who you are, okay. Well, okay.
Really?
Down on the left we have Bob Wright, Larry Utter, Ken Smith, Malcolm Spook Johns, Robbie Bybee, Randy Sohn, and Al Morphew. And we may have some other people in the audience who were here during that time, and I please encourage you to pitch in when you care to. I did prepare, without their help, a list of questions just to get us starting to talk. And I think that once we start answering these questions, other things will come up. And there's no special order. I think when I ask a question, whoever wants to answer it, just jump right in. I think all your microphones are working. But let's start. Today is April 18th, 2015. We all know we got the B-25 from Dr. Kundal in Rice Lake, Wisconsin. But what do we know about the plane before Doc Kundal got it? How did he get it?
The first time that I ever ran into this airplane was back in the probably early 70s. I was taking instrument training over at IFT in Minneapolis. One of my instructors knew Starvin Marvin Shearer, and she invited me up to Anoka to look at this B-25. And Miss Mitchell at that time was in the grass outside. Some of the pictures over here where it's in OD in gray with the yellow speeder, that was the condition I first saw the airplane on. And Marv even said, "Do you want something to do?" And I said, "Sure." He said, "Get a ladder and a screwdriver, go up on the rudder and take off the inspection panel." So that was the first time I ever put my hands on that airplane, and that was, like I say, back probably the early 70s.
So this was before Doc Kundal got it?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, Marv got it. I have no idea where Marv got it from, but of course Miss Mitchell used to be down here.
And who was Starvin Marvin?
Marv Shearer, I believe was his last name.
Okay.
He and Jim Johns and a few other guys had the Union Air Force up in Anoka.
One of the things I failed to get from the museum was a St. Paul Pioneer Press Sunday supplement from 19 whatever. It had Miss Mitchell when the Union Air Force had it before we got it. I couldn't find it, unfortunately. Spook?
I concur with most of that. I was flying for the Cleveland Cliffs Iron Company out of the UP in Michigan while I was furloughed from Braniff for 3 years. And we had a trip down here to Anoka County, and I was walking into town on that southern street to get something to eat. And I saw this B-25 on the other side of the ramp there. And I walked over there to look at it. It was painted in olive drab, and it was a sorry sight, but I'm glad we rescued it.
Now, I had heard someplace that Lysdale brought the plane here originally from Davis Monthan or some such place. Ken?
He bought it in 1958 from the Air Force, and there was this one and 2 or 3 other ones. One of them ended up the one that's up at the Canadian Warplane Heritage with the gun nose on it.
Right.
I think if you looked up the end numbers, then they were in sequence.
Okay.
So it was out here from 1958, and he had a business over here that he would convert surplus aircraft. He was part of the distribution system for the War Assets Administration, and they would convert them to other purposes. And that's why he bought this. He also had, I forget how many B-17s he went through, that they would convert for aerial mapping, at least the B-17s he did. And the first time that I saw this airplane was when I was a little kid. My stepbrother's in-laws lived over here on 5th Avenue, about, I don't know, I don't remember exactly, but somewhere in the last 2 blocks or so, and everything south of that street, whatever it is that runs up here to the outback, everything south of that was fields. There was nothing else, except there was this tree line here, and there was all these airplanes sitting along there. And if you look over in the terminal, there's aerial shots of that. There's a couple of privateers, which I didn't know this at the time, what any of this stuff was, but there were all these old airplanes there. And so I would go, instead of sitting there listening to a bunch of relatives that I didn't know, or kind of shirt-tail relatives, I came over here to the airport, and they were sitting there with, you could climb in them. They weren't very secure. The hatches were open. I remember there were still headsets and other stuff in there, which I don't know what it was at the time, but I remember headsets. And I don't know how big of a time period this is because I was just a little kid at the time, but then the next time I was over here, they had taken all the engines and the landing gear off of the privateers, and they were just on their belly, and the wind would flip them from one wingtip to the other as the wind was blowing. And then now I know that they ended up scrapping those, but at the time it was just a bunch of neat stuff.
Was one of those made in the shade, the one that went to Arizona?
No.
Okay. Randy?
You know, I'd completely forgotten that until he mentioned it.
See?
But-
These are good questions, right?
I remember being on that runway when they burned those privateers, because I remember the sound of that aluminum crackling in the heat. And I also remember, I'd forgotten that I took a B-25 from Holman Field over to Flying Cloud years ago for Johan Larson. That was in the Northliner. That was a B-25.
That was one of them, I think. It had a...
Cuban Air Force. I can't hear anything that you said, but...
Well, that was one of the planes that came up here with Miss Mitchell, I think.
Yep.
And wasn't it on a sheriff's sale or something down at St. Paul?
There was something trouble with customs, so they says, Randy, get that airplane out of there and take it over to Flying Cloud for Johan Larson at the museum over there. Because I remember ferrying it with his brother was a Western mechanic over to Flying Cloud. And I remember him burning that privateer down on the east side of the runway. I'd forgotten all that.
Yeah, they were lined up right along the trees there facing west.
Yep.
Somebody told me that Lysdale flew a B-17 in here one day.
Absolutely.
And somebody challenged him, saying he could never get it in his hangar. He took a bet from this guy. He took the wings off the B-17, put it in his hangar, and won the bet.
I think he used to put DC-3s in here sideways, and I think that there used to be some pictures over there. I think there was a B-17 in here too.
Wow.
Yeah, the railroad tracks come right down here, and the airplane was put on it and went in sideways.
Neat. So did Doc Kundle buy the plane from the Union Air Force from Jim Johns? Is that what happened?
So.
Yeah.
Okay. And how did we get the invitation from him to get the plane? Did he call us up and say, would you like a B-25? Or did someone say, oh, there's a B-25, let's go get it? Remember any of that, how that happened?
I think it was Kundle was the doctor for the National Guard, I believe, and I think that's the link between them.
Okay, cool.
Actually, what it was he said he would donate the B-25 if the CAF checked him out front seat in the Harvard.
Oh,
And they agreed. Doc Kundle never showed for any of the appointments. Larry Doubt had him scheduled 5, 6, 7 times. Doc never showed, ever. Just
okay.
Yeah, I remember bringing that Harvard back from Rice Lake also, that part of that same deal.
Yep.
They says, well, Randy, will you go up to Rice Lake and get that Harvard? And I remember leaving the gear down, and I said, I don't want to have anything to do with a belly landing. I'll just leave the gear down. And I brought that airplane home from Rice Lake. It was all part of the same deal.
Yeah, it was up there to be close for him to use to get trained,
He says,
but he would never,
There it is.
when he had an appointment with the instructor, he'd never come. He never got 1 hour in it.
How long did it take us to get the engines on that B-25 operational?
Neither, Gus. I guess his name is.
I imagine we drove out there
They
Wednesdays
know.
and Saturdays. Anybody? Anybody know how long we,
I just remember they called them sand grenades.
That was the
I know we
next,
went through a
we'll
few.
talk about that later.
that was the next set of engines.
Okay. And what was the ferry flight like from Rice Lake? I understand it was decided not to raise the landing gear
Yeah.
because we weren't sure it would come back down again. Is that true? And who flew it here? Did you fly it, Randy, from Rice Lake? Did you fly, Miss
It was
Mitchell?
over from Rice Lake.
That
Was
one,
that-
not this one.
Not this one, okay.
Steve Green was on this one.
Oh,
Okay.
I don't know who else was with
Well,
him.
he wasn't, you were the pilot, weren't you, Randy? From Rice Lake down here?
No, on that, I brought that one back, and I didn't bring this one back. I took the other one,
What, didn't Flory or somebody?
Flory.
Oh, Flory.
'Cause I had checked Flory out.
That would have been
Flurry
Flory.
and
Yeah,
Don,
Erickson.
I checked Flory out, and that Bell telephone green B-25.
With
and
Lynn Flory.
Okay.
Don
Glenn
brought it
Flory.
back.
oh, okay.
He's the one that owned I See No Problem.
Okay, we're going to get there shortly.
Yeah, I'd forgotten checking him out. I had him crying.
Well, when the plane arrived at Fleming, finally, what was some of the first things we did to it? I mean, you opened the door and pushed it in. Then what?
Cleaned it.
Cleaned it? Okay.
I'm sure,
You've seen the pictures over here on the table, what it looked like when it arrived, so it was kind of nasty.
I don't know who made the decisions to do a complete zero-time overhaul. But that decision was made and, before my time. Larry Utter should know.
Well, I think it was when, Kent, you probably suggested from the history of Ray Osley's Miss Mitchell.
Oh, yeah,
When
Ray.
the decision was whether we're going to paint it or it was going to have a natural finish.
Yeah, but he's talking about the complete disassembly of the whole airplane.
Yeah.
That was done before me.
And
In my
gutting the
opinion,
wiring and everything.
When I came in, it was already assembled, disassembled.
In my opinion, I don't think that decision was ever made at all. I think they just started taking things apart, and as long as there was still two screws, a nut and a bolt that would unbolt, they took it out.
We had what was called the Decision Revision Coordinator.
When I first came over here in the early 80s, I See No Problem was parked here. I See a Problem was parked here.
Oh, boy.
And
Said ever.
this one was facing the other direction. The parts room wasn't as big as it is now. I mean, from the staircase over staircase south wasn't there. So this was pushed up there, so the nose was pretty close to the wall up there. And they had the landing gear collapsed with the back end sticking way up in the air so they could fit two of them in here. And there was nothing going on with this one then. It was all about getting I See a Problem out of here.
We do have a photograph over here of two B-25s in this hangar. I'm not sure if that was what you're talking about, but
Probably.
Joe here has a comment about the inspection, the take apart.
Every time we opened up something, it was so rotten in there, we had to overhaul it.
Okay, out of necessity. I was told the plane had been converted to a trainer before we got it. The top turret was not there, and there was a bench seat installed where the top turret should have been. How were we able to prove it had originally been a J model?
I know the story too.
Well, the most obvious thing is the J was the last model they built at the factory. So all of the revision aircraft after that had been a J at one time. But what Larry Mullally was able to find out is that they were going through the logs because this one had been modified to a radar trainer. So it had, the front was fiberglass and it had radar stuff up there in the
That's
nose.
what it was. I see the stubby nose over here.
5K.
And that's a K.
Say again?
A TB-25K.
TB-25A.
K.
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 With the radar.
And
What about
so
K?
he found
That's what
some,
we had at St. Paul.
he found something in the records where it had taken off as a K model, and when they when they logged the flight, they logged that it was a B-25J, right?
Yes, that's right.
And the guy from the FAA, when Larry was registering it, said, well, it says right there in the official records that it's a B-25J, so that's good enough for me.
I don't know what they did to it en route, but they said, it left as a K and arrived as a J.
Yeah.
Are you discussing whether they're J models?
Pardon me? It was built as a J.
There was a
Because
data.
that was the
We had
last
150 of those old goats at Reese. They were all J's until Hayes modified them into N models or K models. So they're all J models.
Yeah, they're all
That's what I
J's.
said.
Everything that was
Converted.
modified
Some of
after,
them.
all the letters higher than J were modified from J's.
They converted from J's to K's and N's,
Yeah,
and a few to L's.
yeah.
The L had the release for the main gear up latch instead of the nose gear.
Yeah,
Bob?
I'm not sure if it's still there or not, but I think on the data plate that's up in the cockpit, where it says model, it says TB25J, and the T has been X'd. So it was a TB, but then, for however that happened, the FAA said it's a straight J model, and so that T was just X'd out
Just
with a metal
punched
stamp.
out. Okay.
Well, it wasn't punched out, it was just hit with a metal stamp, so
Yeah,
you can still see the T, but it's got a little X on it.
Cool. Distinguish between these four airplanes. I see no problem. I see a problem. Frozen assets, and Miss Mitchell.
This is frozen assets,
Okay.
same airplane.
Okay. That's what I remember. What about I see no problem and I see a problem? Who owned those and where'd they come from? And anybody? They were owned by wing members, right?
Lynn Flory.
Okay. Did he own both of them?
He owned I See a Problem. Him and a fellow named Don Erickson, who
Okay.
was a long-time member here.
So was that the first B-25 that the
That
wing
was
had
the
in
first
its?
one.
Okay. And the
Yeah,
second one was I see a problem.
That was a big problem.
Okay. And why was that a big problem? Tell us.
A piece of crap. Somebody went in there, wanted to make it into a fire bomber, and they went in a bomb bay, and instead of drilling out rivets to unrivet stuff, they took a cold chisel and went like that, and busted the heads off of them, and just chopped out about 2/3 of the strength of the airplane to put another tank in there. Boy, I come over, took one look at that baby and said, I ain't even gonna go in a bomb bay. That's gonna collapse right on you. Because half the structural strength was gone.
Do we know what happened to that aircraft?
Oh yeah,
Tell us.
flying as we speak.
Flying? as we
It's the one that went to Phoenix.
speak. Is that made in the shade?
Yep.
Okay.
ICA problems in Phoenix.
All right,
Oh,
cool.
but it had lots of problems.
And California's got that other B-25. Valley.
ICA problem in Arizona.
Old Brew?
It made a shade.
Yeah, that's the one
I
in
see
California.
it.
Yep.
I see no
ICA
problem.
problems
The
in
first
Maine.
one.
That's the one that's confiscated?
And Old
yep.
Brew was in horrible, in horrible shape too.
Oh, we got a question back here. Amy?
To Talashe at one point. He had it in front of a restaurant out in New York.
Is it true that one of the original B-25s we had was a drug airplane?
They were just,
Oh, you mean, well, you can't prove it by us, but it was rumored that I See a Problem could have maybe hauled drugs, but hey, we don't know that.
Well, that's,
Oh, I don't. I don't know, yeah, wasn't there?
I think that's how Talashe ended up with that airplane, because he bought it at the sheriff's sale after they confiscated it, and ended up in front of one of his restaurants. And I don't know where it is now.
All right, cool. How far into the rebuild was it decided to restore the plane as Miss Mitchell. When it first came in, you called it frozen assets, right?
Yep.
And then at some point, when did that take place? And how did that happen? To name it Miss
Smith
Mitchell.
knows that.
I think it was 85 or 86. I was
It was 86, it was after I came in 86.
somewhere in there because
A newspaper article, some broad wrote into the Minneapolis paper, didn't like that because it was sexist.
Well, shame on us.
originally we had decided to, well, I was on a quest to not have us put a bunch of our own names on there. Well, it wouldn't have been me, it would have been these other guys, the pilots and stuff, but anyway, I wanted to see it accurate, an accurate paint scheme. And so I was a newsletter editor at the time, and I started asking for pictures and stuff, and I also did an article for the 57th Bomb Wing newsletter, and originally we had decided to paint it like the 321st Bomb Group. They had an aluminum bottom. They came overseas, all natural finish, but after the Germans bombed the 340th Bomb Group, everybody was painting the top of their airplanes olive drab, and as near as we could tell, the 321st, everybody in the Mediterranean theater wanted olive drab, so they ran out. And a lot of their bases had British on the other side of the base, so they got a bunch of British green, and the 321st had this British green, which I thought was unique. You could see that even in a black and white picture, you could see the difference between the olive drab glare panel and the green. And so we had voted on that at one point to copy one of their airplanes, and we made models. And you remember this, Joe? I remember the meeting over at the Officers Club where we decided that. Well, then we came back here and decided, we're talking about it. We had the models on the cooler in there, and Gene thought that paint job looked half-ass. And so then we started looking back at paint jobs again, and Ray had these pictures, and he couldn't remember. I could see from the pictures there were 3 different pilots painted on the side of the airplane, and so Ray gave me his reunion directory, and so I was trying to figure out who these guys were that were painted on the side of the airplane. Well, anyway, we decided to paint it like his airplane because the pilot that's painted on the side was killed in action. He was the 3rd pilot. And so that's Don Oliver. So we decided to copy that airplane, and that's how it ended up in the 310th colors. And there was some other lobbying going on from the 57th Bomb Wing guys too. But
Thank you. Tell me about the 50 caliber guns in the airplane. Were they really cast from recycled pop cans? That's a rumor. The 50 caliber machine guns? Joe, why don't you come up? We got an extra mic up here. Why don't you come up here? Okay. Well.
Shy.
Can you tell me about the 50 calibers? Were they, I mean, they're not real,
you guys want to talk?
but were they recast?
Wasn't it Pat McAllister that had his own foundry, and I understand that he's the one that actually cast the guns. Where he got the aluminum from, I have no idea.
We were recycling around here, but it wasn't pop cans.
Okay. Recycled metal, change that story.
He was melting, he had his own, it wasn't really a foundry, but he had his own machine shop over here in St. Paul Park. And he just melted down the aluminum, and he made the pieces and did the machine work and stuff. And he also made parts for this revolving bridge down here whenever that would break. So.
He did all the guns on Fifi too.
Oh, did he? Yeah. Oh, I didn't know
Went
that.
down there, Elliot, got there DC-9, agricultural equipment.
Oh,
We went down to Harlingen for an air show. They chartered a DC-9 for all the people to go down on. The whole belly was full of guns. All in crates, agricultural equipment.
Okay, there's another story for us. Where did we get the parts to rebuild her? I mean, how does the B-25 at Paul Bunyan World fit into this story?
Larry?
Find the pictures, I got pictures of you.
Half right here.
Yeah, well, there was a bunch of us, Harold Weiss and Chuck Schiller, and anyway, this airplane flew into Brainerd, and they towed it down to the amusement park, and it was put up on cribbing and a display, and it was completely operational, functional, although it was demilled, and the operator of the park wanted the airplane to be spruced up after it had been up there for a while, so we kind of agreed to go up there and paint the airplane for them and get it all nice and spiffy, and in return he said we could take off the airplane anything on the inside that didn't show from the outside. Well, that's a lot. They pretty much stripped the airplane.
And tell them how you repainted it. How'd you repaint it?
Very carefully. It was,
The 310th Bomb Group
the
colors.
tail was way the heck up in the air. I wouldn't go up there now, but
Okay.
it was sitting nose down like this, so the tail was really up there. I don't even remember, we have scaffolding?
But you chose the 310th Bomb Group paint scheme.
Right,
It's got the blue and yellow on the tail and
Safe return.
yeah, it's the plane, let me think here a minute. When Oliver was killed, it was flying off of his left wing,
that plane.
number 2. And the pilot was up here for the dedication, Ken Peterson, and we just decided to paint it that color because it was olive drab, and we wanted to paint over everything that was on there. And I remember we got the paint cheap from someplace. I think we got it up at the surplus or something.
Well, I remember painting in the rain.
Yeah. But there was, like that, we've got a life raft compartment up there, I think.
Yep.
Is that still there?
Yep.
And we got that out of there, and they had a broken windshield. Well, we had a windshield that somebody had taken up pliers and busted all the stuff that's supposed to mount the windshield. It busted all that off of it, and we glued that in the co-pilot side. And I don't remember what else we had to fix.
Well, I think,
We were up,
Yeah.
and it wasn't operational anymore when it was sitting up there. I remember Harold kept whacking his head into the prop.
which didn't move.
And we kept telling him, Harold, no matter how many times you hit it, it's not going to move. And 10 minutes later, he's ramming his head into it again.
Well, I remember seeing that B-25 in front of Paul Bunyan World. I used to go up there for conferences every year. And when they tore down Paul Bunyan World and put in a Target or something, the plane disappeared. And I always wondered what happened to it.
I went up and talked to Don McFarland. He was, if anybody remembers, he was Don, the guide that used to coordinate trips to Mexico. He owned the park. And I stopped up there several years after we were up there and asked him how everything was going. And he was a little bit disenchanted because he was under the assumption that our agreement was to maintain the airplane, and it was starting to bleed from rain and weather and everything, and a lot of the colors were bleeding, and he was a little disenchanted. And anyway, I told him, well, I think we can probably get a crew come up here and do some work, and he said, well, it don't make any difference, I'm getting rid of it anyway. So he did, and he got rid of the airplane. I believe Carl Scholl took possession of the airplane, and they brought a Huey and put that in display in place of it.
When I was at the Doolittle reunion in 2012, I ran into Carl Scholl. I said, if anybody knows where that airplane is, Carl will. And I asked him. He said, yes, he bought it, and he gave it or sold it to the World War II Museum in New Orleans. And I saw that a couple weeks ago. They put a solid nose on it.
It looks good.
Yeah, it does. So that's where it is now.
When, before we went up there and take the parts off of it, I guess it was kind of general knowledge that it was up there. Steve Zelli and I went up there to see what it was, what it looked like and everything, and that's when I met this McFarland. And the books, that big parts manual we got that's all in plastic and everything, that came from that airplane. And he was disenchanted at that time too, because they had promised him a ride when they got it. And I don't know who made that arrangement. and got the manuals and stuff, but the manuals were all down here already, and he was waiting for a ride. And we said, well, we're still working on it. It's still in a million pieces at that point. And so he said, oh, okay. Well, then we struck the deal to paint it and, you know, fix all this stuff after that. So.
Cool. Tell us about the installation of the Bendix top turret. Where did it come from? Who found it? Approximately when was that? Because when we got the plane, there was no turret on it. Who can talk about the Bendix turret? Spook.
I brought the stanchion that supports the turret part from Fort Lauderdale. A guy down there specialized in junk, and he claims that this stanchion was out in a field for the last 50 years.
Was that for the Martin?
Shit, I don't know.
Wasn't it Bendix?
What I do remember is that you came over and checked the bearings or whatever, and it was all workable.
Because I think that might have been something for the before this we had a Martin turret, which was never in a B-25, and there's a shelf up there that holds what they call a bearing race that keeps the turret from tipping over. It's designed for side loads, not for supporting a 700-pound turret. A lot of B-25s have that in them now because it's easy to put in, or they'll take off everything, and so it's just something to hold the shell up there. But if you look at some of the airplanes behind the fuselage there, it's all wrinkled from supporting that weight when the weight was supposed to be supported on the floor. The turret that we've got, we had this Martin turret that Dave Conrad had completely gone through, and you could sit there and crank the thing around, and it was all painted and everything. And we traded that to Carl for the Bendix turret, and the Bendix turret, I believe, I had found a bunch of tail turret parts out in New York. The control yoke that's up here is from that bunch. And I believe Carl bought all these turrets from out there, cleaned the guy out, and then we did the trade of the Martin turret for the Bendix turret, and there was some other stuff. I remember I had whatever we were trading, I had laid out here on the ramp and taken pictures of to send to him. And the turret that's in here now had never been in an airplane. It was, I don't know what it was doing out there, but, and it's actually, it's supposed to be a mid-mounted turret. I think it's an R model turret, and if you delve into it enough, you find out that this was a turret that was originally for the mid-mount, like a C or a D model. But it's got the right plexiglass and everything on it, so it looks authentic to a J. But that turret came from Carl.
Good,
and then they Whip over here put it in with their
forklift?
Forklift.
Okay.
And Tom Larson and
Lanista?
no, he flies red nose.
Scott? No.
No, not Lynn.
No, Michael?
Scott Rommel. They rebuilt it, and the azimuth resistor box, which is a thing, it's on this side of the thing. They built all of that out of new parts because they couldn't find one. So I had the drawings for it, and Mel bent up a box, and they found all the components and built it.
Neat, thank you. I know that you had problems with the engines before it was flying, but what was the most difficult part, the most difficult job of rebuilding Miss Mitchell? Was it the engines or?
All of it.
All of it? Okay.
But the most frustrating part was the engines.
Yeah.
Okay.
I
I've got some, I was looking at my videotapes last night, and they're of the first flight, and there's part on there where it was supposed to fly in 91, and engine trouble kept it on the ground again. And those were the engines that we called sand grenades. Yeah. John Sandberg had his hands in there somehow, and in this newspaper article, maybe the one you're talking about, but there was a newspaper article of when the Yankee Air Force had it, I think, and they said that it had low-time engines on it when it was surplused. And remember, Joe, when we'd be doing, there were no propellers on it, and we'd be doing the pre-oiling every so often, every couple months, and there was all this goo that would come out of the center of the propeller shaft. And I don't think they were the same engines. They were sent to get topped off or freshened up or something, and
Had to be certified. Had to go to a builder to get the paperwork on it.
well, it was at Sandberg's, but whatever they sent it up there for, what I'm trying to say though, whatever they sent it up there for, I'm not even sure if we got the right engines back. Maybe the same data plates, but not,
Okay.
because this goo was not coming out of a fresh engine.
Okay, so 12 years later, we had her rebuilt, and it was time for the inaugural flight, and we flew it on the 40th anniversary of the Doodles raid in 1992, and Randy was left seat, and Larry Mullally was right seat. And Randy, what was that inaugural flight like? Tell us. Tell us about the inaugural flight.
I couldn't hear you.
Tell us about the inaugural flight. What was that like, taking it up for the first time in 12 years?
Speechless.
That was after replacing the rear turret hatch.
Yeah.
Yes.
The day before the flight, during a
Wanted to
run-up,
know how
the rear hatch, the rear
inaugural
plexiglass
flight
over
went
the rear turret wasn't secured,
Oh.
and the engine run-up blew it well into the field and destroyed it. Fortunately, we had a spare, so we were ready to go the next day.
Randy, tell us about the inaugural flight.
I think the first thing I found when I got in there, that the right seat, or maybe both seats, didn't have a forward stop on them. You could slide the seat so far ahead that you couldn't pull the yoke all the way back. There was no stopping.
No forward stop.
No forward stop, and they had to fix that before I flew it. But I remember flying it with Mullally. Were you along?
No, I think, it was Larry.
The flight from here to downtown St. Paul was just you and Larry.
Yeah.
Well, first I took off and went down to, what's that airport down south?
Red Wing?
Pardon?
Red Wing?
Webster.
Webster.
Oh, and I remember flying past Webster, and they took off with that RV-7, or who was it?
The girl.
Oh,
Van Grunsman?
didn't Spook chase you in the...
And I remember
in
that
the-
RV-7, if I put this in the turn, he could keep up with me. I was amazed. Then we flew it around a while and did everything I wanted to do with Mullally, and then we brought it back to St. Paul, refueled it, and did some work on it there, I guess.
Yeah, well, then we had to put 25 hours on it before we could be certified. So
That's what it was.
all the flights
They
had to
wanted
enrich.
25 hours on it.
Yep.
Which I finally figured out is BS.
Yeah, the first flight had Spook in the T6
Yeah.
chasing it, along with Channel 9 in their Bell Ranger, or Jet Ranger.
What did you say?
They had a photographer in the back seat of the
Photographer
Harbor.
in the back seat of the helicopter. No, videographer in the helicopter, and you had a photographer in the back seat.
Yeah. And Randy came up and flew formation on us. So the photographer could get a nice shot of the head-on. You don't usually get that with airplanes. And that worked out okay.
Yeah, that's right. You were flying. I remember flying on you.
T6.
And
And
Ken
then,
told me,
and Mullally said, or maybe you said, are you seeing any defects or leaks or anything? And I said, no runs, drips, or errors.
Kent told me that they had a fixed camera on the dashboard and one fixed on the tail.
I got pictures of the
And there was
cameras.
video taken that day.
Oh.
But I've not been successful finding out what happened to that video. You said it was from Channel 9 or something?
Channel 5.
Channel 5?
And
Okay.
I remember also putting wiring for the video cameras control from the co-pilot side deal, because Doug Mattson and I put that in there.
I got pictures of that with me.
Yeah,
And that was
Doug
before-
Mattson and I wanted video cameras on that airplane, and
Yeah.
it was all on a little box over in the co-pilot side.
That was before GoPro cameras too, so those are hardwired. Tell us about the flight over Arlington National Cemetery for Jimmy Doolittle's funeral. I think that was 1993, so the plane had been up for about a year. How did we get that invitation, and how was the flight organized and completed? The reunion, I mean the funeral flight. Kent?
You know, Randy, you went on that.
It was Malali, too.
Malali, they were looking for, the guy's name was Snake Clark at the Pentagon, was looking for airplanes to fly over Doolittle's funeral. Couldn't find any B-17s. I don't know, I think they're all out on the West Coast or something. And he couldn't find any B-25s. They called headquarters, and Show Me was down for some reason. Yellow Rose was down. Nobody else was down, and we're sitting here on jacks going through the annual. And so he calls on a Monday morning, got a hold of Larry because he was the operations officer at the time. And Larry says, well, geez, I don't know where we're at with our inspection. I'll have to call Gene. I'll have to talk to the wing leader. I was the wing leader at the time. I'll have to talk to whoever, you know. He lists off a bunch of people. I got to call all these people first. And that was long before cell phones, so nobody had a phone on them. And so he doesn't know what condition the airplane is in as far as the inspection goes. And couldn't get a hold of Gene, couldn't get a hold of me, couldn't get a hold of whoever else was on his list. And so he calls back Snake Clark and he says, we'll be there, no problem. And I always thought that was our finest hour, because the next day I came in here, the airplane is down on the floor, and all these guys that didn't want to polish it, somehow that airplane was immaculate from one end to the other, and was ready to go on Wednesday.
Yeah.
That was our finest
I remember
hour.
that because they called me the same time and they said, can you do that? And I said, talk to Malali. Hung up, and Malali and Rosendahl. I said, put Malali and Rosendahl on that deal and take it. Malali says, we will go. I says, good. And he says, we'll go VFR. I says, you will not go VFR. Not into Washington with all those restricted areas and all that stuff. Malali says, well, it says right here in the regulations, we have to be VFR. I says, you have talked to the chief pilot. I authorize you to disregard the regulations and you will file IFR, because I didn't want to get a phone call and say, it's all the CAF's fault, and they flew over the White House or whatever all that stuff is. And I said, you will file IFR.
Spook?
There's an interesting sidelight on this. My understanding is that Larry Malali called Wright-Patterson to see if we could refuel there. And the guy says, we don't accept civilian airplanes in Wright-Patterson. So they called the Pentagon, and the Pentagon called Wright-Patterson, and we called him back after pointing out to this individual that you're probably going to like it up in Siberia. So that's how we got fuel.
Yeah,
Actually came to me in the days of, like Kent said,
Yeah, 'cause
they
they
just
didn't
went
have
down
any
the phone list to
gas.
find people,
They
and I
didn't
was
have
on the
any
staff at the
gas.
time.
They had to
And
bring
I
in
was actually
inspection.
called by the base
To
commander.
have gas.
Saying, and the quote I remember is, there is no way in hell I am allowing a civilian aircraft here, and no way in hell am I bringing in 100 low lead. Figure something else out. So we called Snake Clark,
same way with the
who then
regulations.
said, give me an hour. And an hour later, called back from the base commander's exec officer saying, we'll be happy to see you tomorrow.
It's all in who you know. Kent?
What we did was we went to the base flying club where they had 100 low lead. And
I have a certificate here.
Argument was right path.
I've got a certificate here And it shows Larry Mullally as pilot, 2 co-pilots, Bruce Oberman and Doug Rosendahl. Flight engineer was Doug Olson. Crew chief was Ray Ostley. And the crew was John Shuck, Ken Smith, and Scott Rommel on that flight. Thank you, guys.
What?
Who wants to tell us about the nose art? We know it's an Alberto Varga image from Esquire magazine. I seem to remember December 43, could be wrong. How was that image selected? Who painted it? Where was the plane located when it was painted? And how did we get the nose art recreated on the plane when it was ready to fly again in 1992?
It was Kowalik that painted it, the original gentleman that painted Miss Mitchell during the war.
Kowalik?
Kowalik.
And what was Kowalik's first name? Was it Ray or Jack?
It was Ray, but everybody called him Jack. I think it was his middle name or something.
You can call me Ray, or you can call me Ray J, but you don't have to call me Ray J.
Raymond Kowalik, but he was,
Okay, it's
everybody,
Ray.
he went by Jack.
Jack, okay. Well, I've seen both names, and I always thought it was Ray, so, okay. And where was the plane when the nose art was painted on it? Was it in North Africa?
Oh, Corsica.
Corsica, okay.
Yeah, it was, the plane was delivered to the 310th, the original one, late April of 1944. And I don't know how long it flew without any nose art. But some of the other names that they wanted to name it, the guy named Faulkner was the tail gunner, and Macaulay was the radio gunner, I think. Those 2 guys wanted to name it Mr. Period. MR period. And Miss Minucci is another one that they had talked about. And Ray says, nothing doing. Keep in mind that at this time, the original one was a 20th B-25 off the assembly line that didn't have paint on it. So when it got over there, all the rest of the planes, the J's and the H's and the C's and the D's that they were still flying, they were all camouflaged. Well, this one comes over, they're all brand new bare aluminum, and Ray says it's the best looking airplane out here. We're going to call it Miss Mitchell, just like a beauty contest. It's the best looking one here. And he overruled the rest of them, and that's what it ended up being. And the going rate at the time was about $35 to have Kowalik paint the girl on there. Really? And I don't know what their rate of pay was at the time, but that was a lot of money. Yeah. Off the top of my head, I don't know, but it was like, I don't know, $50 a month or something like that. I mean, that was a lot of money that he got. But he was really good. And he painted all these other ones when he came up here.
These were sister ships of Miss Mitchell in the 310th Bomb Group. These were sister ships.
Right.
In the 310th. Yep.
Anyway, so he painted the original one over there, and that you're right about December 43 Esquire that it was in, and it did have a cape on it in that picture, and they left the cape off because they were going to put the missions on this side, and then after he got it up there, they decided to put them on the other side. And so that's...
And Virgin Airlines in England uses that same image on their planes today.
Fagan's got the same girl on.
Fagan's got the same girl on Paper Doll, that's right.
Paper Doll.
It was a popular image in World War II. And when it came time for the plane to fly, how did we get the nose art recreated on her?
Well, I said before, Ray had given me his reunion directory, and through talking to people, I found out that the guy that had painted the nose art over there was Ray Jack Kowalik, and he lived in Austin, Texas. And so I talked to him on the phone, and we offered to pay for him to come up here. He drove his 455 Oldsmobile all the way up here, which was nothing unusual at the time, but we paid for all of his gas and his motels and everything else, and he did the painting for nothing. But I think we had maybe $600-700 in the whole thing. Wow. He was up here for a week. I took the week off of work and made all these panels. Kenny Schultz got all the sheet metal from a used to be a furnace company, so it's all furnace sheet metal. The rest of it's all wood that I got at Menards or someplace. And because the guy was so good and he had so many neat nose art pictures that it was like, can you paint some other stuff for us, And he was a jeweler after the war, and he had done family portraits and stuff to hang on the wall and that, but he hadn't done anything this big since the war. So he got this 4-foot roll of paper and had it stuck to the garage wall, and he started doing stuff that size. I don't know if we still have it or not, but there was a How Boot That picture up here, and he had done How Boot That, Miss Mitchell, and he had a bunch of them, and it turned out that those were bigger than what was actually fit on the airplane. But I'd given him the dimensions so he could.
Well, the crew chiefs obviously had pull in the nose art, because I talked to Bonham Cross. Bonham Cross flew Wise Decision. He said it was his crew chief who picked that because it was a racehorse he knew. So
the crew chief's name on that one was Leon George, and he was from Texas, and he was into horses. The C or D model that he had in North Africa was War Admiral, and that had a big horse on the side of it too.
Neat. And we talked about this briefly, but tell us why Don Oliver's name is on the aircraft.
Well, he was a third pilot. He came over there in August of '44, September, I forget exactly. When he was in high school, he got his pilot's license at an airfield that's right by Kent State, or probably not there anymore, but it was at the time. And he wanted to enlist in the Air Force or the Army Air Corps, and he was too young, they wouldn't take him. He had his pilot's license, so he liked motorcycles. He had a motorcycle. He took his motorcycle and went to Canada and tried to enlist in the RCAF. While he was up there, he got pneumonia, and his parents were not happy with this whole idea anyway, so his older brother and his dad went up there and drug him back. When he got old enough to enlist in the Army Air Corps, he enlisted, and he had flown, I think it was 76 missions that he was, when he was killed. He had flown his 70 missions, and he was a lieutenant, and the powers that be, they needed more experienced pilots, and he was a lead pilot. And just like in the Catch-22 movie, they wanted more missions out of him. So they said, and he had intended to make the Air Force his career. So they said, if you fly 10 more missions, we'll send you home a captain. And so on his 76th mission, he didn't come back.
He was flying another airplane.
Flying that airplane.
Oh.
Oklahoma.
Okay.
On the other side, it had a cow. The name of it was Betsy. The Borden cow was up painted on the other side. The pilot at the beginning of its tour of duty was Ed Betts, so they named it Betsy.
Cool. What was the route of the 310th Bomb Group in World War II? Where did they start, and where were they when the war ended? They started in Africa and ended up in Corsica.
They trained in Columbia, South Carolina, and the airplanes went over the southern route. The ground crew went over the northern route through England. Some of the airplanes went through England too because they got bombed by the Germans when they were in England. But most of them went the southern route. And they went across North Africa, and then in, I think it was February of 1944, they went to Corsica. And then right after Oliver was killed in the beginning of April, they went to Fano, Italy, and that's where they closed out the war.
And tell us why only 122 missions are painted on the fuselage of Miss Mitchell. How many total missions did Miss Mitchell fly? Why do we pick 122?
Ray had a picture that he had sent back to his dad. I don't know if we have that picture here, but it's Ray with his elbow hanging out of the cockpit. Got a tan, he looks like an Indian. And anyway, on the back of it, he sent this picture to his dad, and he says, here's the old girl, or something like that. Got 122 missions on it, and that was somewhere around Christmas time, between Christmas and March. He wasn't sure, but that was his writing that it had 122 missions on it, and I took that as documentation that it had at least that many. If we want to know exactly how many missions were on it, you got to go to Suitland, Maryland, and look at the mission rosters with all the crews and the airplanes listed on each mission and count them up. But we figured this was about what it had on it on March 10th, 1945, when they received the Presidential Unit Citation, and Miss Mitchell was leading the second element. Al Bouthat was leading the whole.
And why did they get the Presidential Citation?
It was bridges at Ora, Italy.
In the Po Valley? Is that what it was? Okay.
Well, Brenner Pass, I think it is.
Brenner Pass, okay. Thank you. What was the worst damage that Miss Mitchell sustained during the war? It went through, all those years and never lost a crew member, but was there any damage to the aircraft?
I don't think they ever lost a crew member, but I don't think I wouldn't be comfortable saying that.
Okay.
I think they did, but I have no proof of that. Ray couldn't remember anything.
But I'd heard that, go ahead.
The worst damage that they got was a plane in front of them threw out their frequency meter because they lost an engine, and they had gotten shot. It was ME-109s that were after them, and they had gotten shot up, both engines, and the bombardier was up here in the front, and they had a 20 millimeter hole through the propeller on the number one engine. I think the other engine was hitting the oil system or something. So he knew something was going on because he'd see the fighter planes going by, but he was so busy bouncing around in there trying to see, because they were coming from behind and they'd go flashing by him. Well, he can't see what's going on. The plane's vibrating funny, and he's jumping around there trying to see behind the plane, and he pulled out his headset, pulled the end off of the headset so he couldn't hear what was going on. So he decided, I'm going to go back and ask somebody. There's a lot of action going on, and there's planes hit around the whole formation. So he crawled into the tunnel. As soon as he got ducked into the tunnel, they'd go back and talk to the pilots. His frequency meter hit right above the gun, took out the glass, and all this stuff come flying by him. And to my knowledge, that's probably the worst damage that they had. They made it back to base. I think both engines were still running, but they made it back to base. That was Oliver flying. Art Ensley.
You're going to fly to C-130s out there or something? That darn Air National Guard does that every time.
Can't see it.
A maximum effort.
Yeah. Ray told me that a freak meter was about the size of a metal lunchbox. It weighed...
A little bigger than that, I think.
Okay, it weighed like a cinder block.
Yeah.
So it was pretty heavy. Okay.
Well, they had radioed and told Oliver to drop back because they were going to salvo their bombs, and the bombs weighed 500 pounds, and this frequency meter had a different trajectory. He hadn't dropped back, far enough.
Cool.
The other time when Ensley was flying it, they got an 88 millimeter right through one of the fuel tanks, I think on this side. That was over Yugoslavia someplace, and so they weren't flying it the next day. And then the next day, because Miss Mitchell went to the service squadron then to get that fixed, and the next day they were flying a different airplane and got shot down. So that was...
Thank you.
Crew member did get killed in that incident, but not
I'm out
Miss Mitchell.
of all the history questions about the airplane, unless you have anything else to tell us about its World War II history that we need to know, should know. Well, my last question has to do with fun events you've had in the airplane since you flew it. And I was told of an event someplace, somewhere, where you lost an engine in flight and inverted the aircraft.
It wasn't actually a loss of an engine, it was during pilot training.
Okay.
And Larry was instructing a pilot, and they were doing single engine maneuvers, and that particular pilot couldn't get on the rudder. And I was sitting actually in the back watching everything, and I saw the tail come around, and the next thing I knew, we were upside down, and I was on the ceiling actually, and not on the floor.
Did not have your tray table and seat belt in upright position.
No, you know, you fly in her long enough and you just get fat, dumb, and happy. And I was just sitting there, because I was jumping from window to window watching the engines, since we were doing single engine and stuff, so, yeah.
Any other fun stories like that, Kent?
I think Al was co-pilot one time when we flew back from down by Mason City. We were coming back from, where were we coming
One
from?
of those
Omaha or
airs,
something?
Wichita.
Yeah, that's probably what it was. And we flew all the way back here on one engine. I don't think it turned out to be a major problem.
I was telling Rosendahl, I says, there's nothing wrong with the oil temperature. He says, oh, we better shut her down anyway. Well, being an old airline type, I'm not real eager to go flying around on one engine if you don't have to. But he shut it off, and I kept saying, I don't think there's a thing wrong with it. And finally he said, well, maybe we should start it up and bring it back in. I says, I think that'd be a good idea. So
If I remember right, I think we started
back
it
up
just
and it
before
was
landing.
fine.
Yeah, we started it just before landing, because if there was something wrong,
yeah,
we'd still have power for the landing, yeah.
this way. It flew fine on one.
And I think on the radio calls to everything, Larry had just took off from Flying Cloud with the P-63 and joined up on us and kind of followed us all the way into Fleming, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I remember that.
Spook?
I got pictures.
Yeah, the year after Doolittle was interned at Arlington, the Raiders had their annual April shindig out in Fresno, California. And because we'd been part of the flyover at Washington, we were invited. And I think Larry and Rosenberg, or Rosendahl, is it? Whatever. Flew the airplane out there. Then a fellow, Pat Anderson, if you remember him, I haven't seen him since then. He and I caught airline flights out to Fresno, and the next day we were going to fly in a 7 B-25 formation with 5 Mustang Escorts and a C-48, which is a C-47 with upholstery, and
No, the C-53.
anyway, and they had room for the still living Doolittle Raiders to fly along with this thing. So then they had the big band dance that night and all that jazz. So we got up the next morning out to the airport, and these 7 B-25s were on the ramp there, and every one of them had their bomb bay doors open, and every one of them had a local florist pumping brand new stem flowers in there. And we took off and joined up and went out to the 17-mile drive in by Monterey. What the hell's Cancun? No. Anyway, and that's where all the famous golf courses are along there. There was thousands of people.
Pebble Beach.
Yeah, okay.
Carmel.
Carmel. That's what I'm trying to think of.
Yeah.
And there was just thousands of people out there. And we made one pass, and with the bomb days closed, and then we went out over the ocean, and one of the Mustang drivers is about to shit his pants because he'd never been over the ocean before, and he was concerned about failure. And we came around again and popped the doors, and just it was raining flowers, and it was really cool.
I've never heard that before. That's a great story.
Yeah, and then we continued on up to what the hell's that Air Force base?
Beale.
No, Beale.
Beale,
Yeah, Beale
yeah.
Air Force Base. So we just went up the coastline and turned into San Francisco Bay, and we were invited to around the thing. As we were going in over the Golden Gate Bridge, I told Larry, the last time I was this close, I was under it.
But we were between the pillars. It goes up like that. We were between them. If I could ever find him, I got pictures.
He was flying a Sky Raider at the time, not a B-25.
Anyway, we went up to Beale Air Force Base. They had another shindig for the guys, and we took off, and we went to Salt Lake City that night. And we found out that the B-25 climbs just about as fast as the Sierra Mountains.
Well, we buzzed the salt flats, remember that?
Yeah. Then we just smoking across the salt flats, Interstate 80, and we're doing about 40 feet, and there's a guy up in the turret, and there's two truck drivers go, what the hell is going on here?
The turret aiming the guns at all the
Because I was up front with you.
We were wishing we had a CB to hear what they say.
Well, folks, we've got a cast of celebrities up here. This is going to be a good chance for you to ask questions. Jerry, you had your hand up.
Comment about way back in Columbia, Flight 3, B-25, Cardinal and Miss Mitchell, and we lost an engine in Missouri, fuel pump.
Did you find it? Okay.
And so we landed at some field, and one of the EMPs installed a new fuel pump, or carburetor. And we set the neck there, and then we took off and made it home.
It's always nice to have an A&P on board, isn't it?
Well, it was a carburetor.
Yeah, and the other plane. Yeah, cool.
We were flying the 3 B-25. We were invited to refuel several times along the way.
Do you remember the flew past Mount Rushmore?
Aaron, you got your hand up?
Rushmore, too? And we got pictures.
Did you ever see those pictures today? That was the whole idea. Were you in that Piper or whatever the hell?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Well, I just flew out.
Because we don't fly that high.
They came with an oxygen system. They took all that stuff out for weight. They took out when they first got the B-25 over in Corsica, they took off the cheek packs, took out all the extra guns. I don't know why they left that one in, but the bottom one was taken out. They took out the heaters. That's why in this insignia over here, there's that big teardrop silver. That's where the air intake for the heater was. But the oxygen system they took out because they were doing low level and medium altitude bombing, and they didn't think they needed it. Later on, when they got it to the Brenner Pass, they were as high as 18,000 feet without oxygen in formation.
Rooftop.
So
there's ever going to be a chance for the Miss Mitchell to have an oxygen system in it, so you can try and get it up to 25,000?
It's an antique,
No
right?
reason to.
no reason, I don't think.
Yeah.
No need to fly it
Yeah.
that high, I'm guessing. So,
Why
Wondering if we
bother?
should put oxygen
Why
back
bother?
in so we can
Saves
fly
weight.
25,000.
questions? Jerry.
Strangest things I've seen at field. Somebody was hoping that when Carl wrapped the rope around the hub, the starter went out, hooked it to the beam, pulled the engine over that way like you go along.
There used to be a video of that around.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yep.
That's crazy. Anything else?
There is actually a starter kit.
Last chance. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you very much for coming. I've enjoyed this. I hope you have too. And if you have any other things you want to tell us, please let us know. I'm hoping this has been videotaped and audio taped, and I hope we'll have a recording of this at some point, which you can all see, and you can admire yourselves. Kent?
I've got some pictures
That's right.
over here that are, I know there's pictures of that camera set up. This was just whatever I could find, so there's no real organization to it. But there's pictures of the camera setup that was in there for the first flight. There's pictures of the, you kind of have to know what you're looking at, but it's the Doolittle trip. There's one guy in there that's sitting in the normal position looking out the window. And if you're familiar with the Ploesti raid, they had 2 more engines on them, but this guy was there for the funeral. There's a lot of people there that knew Doolittle and had worked with him over the years. And there must have been 20 Tuskegee Airmen. I didn't go in the flyover, I went to the funeral. And there was all these red tails there, and they always wear their red blazer. Joe Foss was there. Oh gosh, I don't remember. There was a lot of people there anyway that were, it was like who's who of World War II at the time. And as we were standing there watching all this, all these much more important people than us were up probably about the distance almost to the door there ahead of us, and all the red tail guys were up there, and Joe Foss was there, and I was back. They had a rope along there so that the people that were more intimate with them than we were up there, and we were just all hanging in the back there. And I looked down, and I was standing right next to the headstone for the commander of the Challenger, and not too far from him was Pappy Boyington.
Wow.
And I don't remember who else. I know those two were right there close. So Doolittle's, 30, 40 feet from those guys. And this guy that's in the picture, that's how I started telling you about, he was there for the funeral. And in the Ploesti raid, they got out of sync. So there were planes coming in from different directions when they weren't supposed to be. He was the one, his group, he was an 8th Air Force guy that had gone down there for that, and his group was the only one that was on time and on course. He was coming from the right direction, dodging all these other guys that were, I don't remember his name, but I have it in a book someplace. But that's, his picture's over there anyways, we met him.
And I do have some pictures from the Doolittle funeral here. I just ran out of room on the table, so I've got a couple pictures of us, of you guys, and I think the Doolittle family in front of Miss Mitchell. So you're welcome to take a look at those.
As a parting thing,
Sure.
I think it would be rather humorous for Kent to relay the circumstances that surrounded him carjacking the general's staff car. This was at the Doolittle funeral, right?
No, that was, well, I was on the way home.
Yeah.
While we were in D.C. there, this was 83, they had all these, the Air Force had a whole fleet of K cars. Reliance, the car that saved the Chrysler Corporation. So we had a 4-door one that they assigned to us to drive. And, they're all blue, they all look the same. And so we were getting the airplane ready for I'm going to start before that, I guess, because he was telling me I should tell this too. We were getting the airplane ready to go, and we were at the flying club again. They got this nozzle that's like you'd find at Super America, but it's got a hose long enough to reach the other end of the hangar. So the stuff is just trickling out of there, and we're putting like 600 gallons on or something like that. It's just taking forever. And so we're out there fueling, trying to get ready, and we were selling hats, and it burned up a lot of time. Well, they had told us it's going to take you at least, you guys that aren't going on the flight, it's going to take you at least an hour to get to Arlington. And so we're thinking about this, and I think we were supposed to be there maybe at 2 o'clock for the funeral or something. So we're looking at our clocks, and it's not, the time just isn't going to cooperate with us, and we're all sweaty, we're outside there, we'd have to get cleaned up and everything. And so we got done with that, got the plane ready to go, and Mullally, took over and did their thing. We raced back to where we were staying, took a shower, cleaned up, talked to this guy I was talking about in the 8th Air Force and his wife, got in the car and headed towards the cemetery. And that morning, Larry, being as precision as he always was, had a GPS, and him and John Shuck and Bruce, I think, went out to the grave site, and he marked it on his GPS so he'd know because everything looks the same, So he marks it so he'd know exactly where it was. Well, Shuck was along on this ride, and he had been taking notes on how to get there. Well, they go back. Well, Shuck is with us in this car, and him and Larry's first wife, Kate, who was kind of domineering or not used to not having her way. She's in the back. Scott Rommel was in there. Ray, John,
Got all these people in a K car?
yeah, it was a four-door.
Sardine can.
So I think John Shuck was in the front seat, as I remember, and he's got his notepad out there. And this is supposed to take us like an hour. We got there 5 minutes early. We left at 25 minutes to whatever time we were supposed to be there, got there 5 minutes early. I was driving. When I was younger, I was kind of a maniac. So we got there, we parked the car and we were walking over to where the cemetery, or where the gravesite was. We missed the funeral. We didn't know where we were going to meet where they had the ceremony. So anyway, that was our experience in DC. So we got this blue car. Okay, so now we're on our way home. We stop at Dayton. There's another blue car there. And so when we were at the funeral, Larry had talked to Jimmy Doolittle III, his grandson. And he was the head of their testing program there at the time, and he had already been promoted and was going to go out to Edwards Air Force Base and be the base commander out there. So he said, I've never flown a B-25, and Larry says, if I got a deal for you, just meet us there at the flying club, and we'll go do some touch and goes. You get a feel for it. And so he tells, we get there, and he's being gracious, and he says, why don't you guys take my car and go over to the museum? So, okay, we go around the corner. Here's a blue car. He says the keys are in it. Go around. Well,
another
evidently he had driven. No, this was his official car. But evidently the car he was offering us was his private car, which we couldn't tell from, we didn't know what it was. Well, here's a blue one. The key's in it. Let's take it. So we all got in it. We thought we had no idea that we weren't in the right car as far as he was concerned. So we're going over to the museum, and we're driving along there, and back in the 60s, they used to have these under-the-dash air conditioners that were about this big. Well, this thing is in the 80s, but it's got this big box under there, and it's a radio that'll pick up the sun, moon, and planets. I mean, it does everything. We didn't think anything of it other than it cut into our legroom, We're driving along there, and it happened to be, they were doing maneuvers that weekend. The F-16s were going up to Volk Field. I guess there's a gunnery range or something there.
Yep.
Everybody's on alert, and there's all these guys walking around, ready to go. They got their guns and everything, and they're marching along, and as we're driving out, they're all snapping to attention and saluting us.
You didn't see the stars on the
these
bumper.
guys are great. What a welcoming community. We're driving through the base, and these guys are all saluting us. And so we get over to the museum, and we figured we had an hour and a half or something like that, so we went through the museum. I was just about running through the whole thing because I wanted to see everything. And we come back, and they're out there searching the parking lot for this car. Larry, and they had his car that he had intended to give us, and they're driving around, and he's in a lather because, not mad, this has got this fancy radio, and it's his command car and all this stuff. And so they're driving around there, and they got out there just as we came out the door, and we're going to come back there. We said, oh, don't worry about it, don't worry about it. Everything's fine, nothing happened, He's excited. We didn't have time to be excited because we just found out that we had done the wrong thing. So he says, don't worry about it, no problem. So whoever was driving his car took his car back, and he got in with us. Well, it was pretty crowded, so as I remember, I think John Shuck was laying across the guys in the back seat. We still got to go through the gate. And Doolittle's grandson was really nervous because this is unsafe operation here. He's a big shot there. And we come driving through there, and all these guys saluted us, and we just went right on through them. But he's like, So that was, is that what you wanted to hear?
Somewhat, yeah, it was a little longer than I thought.
Well, I had to start at the beginning.
It's a fitting climax for this story. Let's give these, oh, one question?
I just wanted
Linda?
to personally thank you for bringing this plane back to life in history. You've given many of us experience and memories of that. So just thank you.
Here, here. Let's give these guys a hand.